Have you ever felt like you're constantly juggling a million things, pushing yourself to the limit, and wondering if burnout is just an inevitable part of success? Well, if that sounds familiar, you're in the right place today. We're super excited to have Dr. Kellie Rose with us. Kellie is an absolute expert in helping executive women not just survive, but truly thrive in high pressure environments. She brings a unique perspective, having transitioned from the intense world of elite sports to now coaching leaders on how to achieve sustainable high performance without burning out. So get ready for some incredibly valuable insights. Welcome.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So let's start at the beginning. What inspired your transition from elite sport to coaching executive women on health and performance?
It was really my own experience with burnout, put very simply. I went through that about 10 years ago now. It was during the time that I was actually working in elite sport. And as is the case with big events like that, it really makes you stop and think about life and what you want and what the next steps are. So that was really the catalyst for change for me. Asked myself those questions. And at that point in my career, I'd been in sport for about close to 10 years at that point and, had done some wonderful, amazing things. And I felt like I'd achieved what I wanted to in that area. And I was also really keen for a change. I really wanted to have a bit of a bigger, broader impact outside of the sports space. So that looked different for a couple of years. I would say I followed passion for a little while, working with a couple of different companies in the sport and digital health space. So still very similar, but I hadn't found that purpose piece yet. And it was in sort of 2021. So just post COVID, and a lot of things were happening in the business space, in particular around women in leadership. Burnout really came to the fore, particularly for women. And it was really just, I guess, this culmination of all of my experience, my academic background, and coming together to really serve in a bigger way a different cohort. I'm really passionate about women's health from a physiology perspective. So I think everything just really came together at that point, and I'd found that purpose piece alongside the passion. And I knew that this was something new, bringing this kind of like health and performance knowledge into the business space. And I was just really keen to, have an impact there and really help where I could. I'd been through it before as well. So I had that additional layer of insight, I guess, to be able to really connect with what was going on.
Yeah, and just thinking back into your personal experience with how did that burnout kind of shape what you're doing now within your approach with coaching?
It's fundamental. So I utilized my experience, which wasn't so great in the post-recovery phase, and to really put that into a usable format that will help other people. I think that's it. We go through pain and we really want to package it up and help other people not experience that pain or do it easier. So I guess what that looked like for me, to give it a little bit of context, 10 years ago when I went through burnout, that wasn't in the vernacular really back then. We weren't talking about it. We certainly weren't talking about recovery from it. So it was very much a self-navigated journey, and there wasn't the professional support, the guidance, the programs, the coaching. And so for the first time, I really had to utilize my health knowledge and apply it to myself. It took about 5 years, I will say, in that process of trial and error, what worked, what didn't, what was sustainable, really in reducing that chronic persistent stress that was always there. That's a big part of it. For me, it was repairing my sleep and insomnia, recovering my energy back, and getting to a point where I could function again, physically and mentally, because it's so depleting. And so, as I said, that took a number of years to really, in that trial and error process, regressing and then learning and coming back. And so what I've done is shaped that into my process now. It's an evidence-based framework, and it's based on those 5 pillars of health. So stress, sleep, recovery, energy, and exercise, movement, and it's all hormone informed. So for women with my target audience, midlife women going through perimenopause, that really came into play. And it did for me as well. So that's sort of the framework that I utilize. And I think on what I touched on before, it's having that deep knowledge and insight, that compassion for what it's like to be at the depths of that very dark hole that it can be, that deeply personal part. And I've talked about this before, but how it really shapes your identity to the core. I think, you're a high performer, a high achiever, and suddenly that feels like it's shaken. So I really bring that, I guess, that understanding and compassion for what the women are going through. It's deeply personal.
Yeah. What are some unique maybe challenges women leaders face in these high pressure roles that often get unnoticed?
Good question, because I think I get asked this a lot actually. And burnout, I guess burnout is universal. We know that. It's just, and we know the causes, but it's just that it's happening for women at higher rates than men. So burnout globally is sitting at 35%, according to the Infinite Potential report this year. For women, it's at 38%. For men, it's at 32%. So it's really about what's contributing to the burnout for women that's different to men. And I could probably distill it down to a couple of things. And one being the loads, the invisible loads that women carry, the mental load, the personal load, the life load. They're working these demanding roles and careers whilst being primary carers for children, caring for aging parents, running households, maintaining marriages and relationships, social, let alone their own health. So it's like the sandwich, but then it's also coming from all sides. We've got the economic pressures now as well. So I feel like there's a lot in sort of the loads, and there's actually a term coined the double shift. And it's where women are working the 9 to 5 and then the 5 to 9. So they're taking the lion's share of household responsibilities as well, the household, the care duties. And I think that's sitting at about 2 hours and 19 minutes difference daily between the genders, according to one of the latest reports from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency here in Australia. It's these factors combined with, or before we even step into what corporate roles demand.
Or even just the things that happen before having to go to the 9 to 5, right? Like getting the
Yeah,
children ready or whatnot, and just trying to prepare for that day.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
funny sometimes the women that I'm coaching really say, the most stressful part of my day is actually before I get to work, getting the kids out the door to school. So, there's a lot on both ends.
sure. How does corporate culture contribute to burnout, especially for women in leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've thought about this a lot lately, and I think many industries and professions we're still operating as relics of the past. And by that, I mean that if we think about work historically, it was designed by men for men decades ago, and women weren't part of that equation. And I don't think we've really caught up. Now, that's not every industry, that's not every organization, but I think on the whole, from what I see, it's quite popular. And what that really, I guess, then causes is unrealistic expectations. I just mentioned all of these loads and responsibilities that women carry, professional women, and we're still expected to work like men. But the men often have wives doing all of this additional work. So professional women, we are the wives and we are the professionals, and we're expected to do both. And that's what I was sort of talking about before when I was talking about all the different loads we carry. The second one, I think, is around this nature of the capitalist culture. So it sounds quite brutal, but if we are going to prioritize our profits over people, then we'll continue to be stuck in this cycle. We won't do what's necessary to make change, to cultivate well-being for everybody, not just some people. And with burnout in particular, there's reports, particularly one by McKinsey a couple of years ago, finding that toxic workplace culture is a leading cause of burnout. So we know that. And I think the nuance is it's especially true for women when we experience different workplace experiences through what we call micro stressors and things that we deal with on the daily, similar to that invisible load that I talked about. There's invisible micro stresses that we also deal with that sort of come into play there. So I think that's really a unique mix when they all come together in terms of corporate culture, what we're expecting, the leadership in the workplace overall, and then from a really macro perspective that the profits over people, which is also a conversation being had at the moment.
How can organizations better support female leaders to thrive, right? Rather than just surviving, just being able to barely, maintain.
Yeah, just getting through every day. And I certainly know what that's like. That was me for quite a number of years, really just in survival mindset and survival mode. And it is not a nice place to be. So I think when it comes to how we can better support women, it's that sort of inclusive nature of it. And I've touched on a couple of really key factors already so far, but I think of it like a garden. So the overarching responsibility of organizations is to create these thriving workplaces, like a garden, where people can come, they can do their best work, they can perform, and they can thrive as well without sacrificing themselves. So work shouldn't be pushing us into this hole where we're barely surviving. And to extend that analogy, I think about it like a flower. So I can work with leaders, women leaders, and make them the healthiest, most resilient possible versions of themselves. But if every day they're going into an unhealthy workplace, perhaps with toxic cultures, they are going to wither and wilt. There's nothing we can do about that. So it's really, what kind of garden are you creating as a workplace where your people can come, do their best and thrive? And so what does this look like? It's the deep work that's not a quick fix. It's not fruit bowls on the lunch table. It's systemic change, and it's systems, it's the structures, the processes, the procedures that we have an opportunity to make more inclusive, to be catering to the needs of women and others without consequence. And I think that's the big one. It's well and good to have these, policies or systems in place, but if there's any type of backlash from taking up those policies, then it's rendered useless, basically. And so I think, how do we get around that? Well, it's really, what are the leaders doing? It starts at the top. So role modeling here, role modeling the culture and these policies in action, show people that it's a legitimate pathway and options that they can take. Role modeling is everything. People do what you do, not what you say. So they're watching that. And I think that that's a lot about what I think about in terms of the goal of my work. So how do we get more women leaders in those top positions? How do we create more healthy and well women leaders within these organizations that can really advocate and create change at the top as well for women coming after them? I think about it like that legacy question. What kind of workplaces are we creating for the future for your daughters, granddaughters, for your wife? What do you want that to look like? It's really doing the deep work, I think, which is a mid to long-term solution.
Yeah, I imagine the process of just, when you're trying to bring some change and maybe there's some resistance, maybe from the individual, maybe from the team, and kind of looking at the type of feedback and stuff that you're getting, because change doesn't happen overnight. And especially if you're working with a potential toxic culture, like things that could be going on for a while. You're not going to just like change it tomorrow, right? And everything's fixed. Like, it's a process. Feedback, I imagine, is very, very crucial.
Absolutely. And I don't discount how much work is involved here. And I will say this is, really targeted, really intentional change in organizations. And some are on the front foot and progressive and doing this already. And it's amazing to see. And really, I love seeing organizations and startups that are really embedding this from the start. So I think that's the beautiful opportunity. Established big traditional companies, yeah, it takes a lot to really turn that ship around. And so it's not to say it's impossible, but yeah, there's certainly a lot more effort required in something like that. Huge rewards. I think we're all aware of that now. Huge rewards for the well-being of the people on the other side.
Great. So you had kind of touched a bit on the five pillars of the health framework. Can you kind of further explain like why it's essential for achieving the sustainable high performance?
It's really a foundation of the work that I do, because I believe that health is the foundation for you to be able to perform and lead. It's that platform for your performance. And I think about this and I depict it as a triangle model. So think of a triangle. The base of that triangle is your health. It has to be. And that provides the stability and the strength for you then to grow and deliver on your performance and your leadership capabilities. But what I see so often, and you've probably seen this as well, Scott, is, we invert that triangle, but we still keep health on the bottom. So now we're a very unstable platform, if there's a platform at all, and health is still at the tip, at the bottom, and we just try and pile more performance and leadership capacity and upskilling and development, all of these things on top of it, but we don't have the basis to handle it. And so really that's why I like, put it into the triangle, and we need to flip that, because when we have a really strong, stable foundation of health, we do have that capacity physically and mentally to show up and do what we need to do, particularly as leaders. When we are, at the top of that org chart, what we do really, really matters and has an impact. So you can break that foundation, that bottom layer, base layer, into the 5 pillars that I've mentioned previously. So when we're looking at strengthening our health, we strengthen these 5 areas: the stress, the sleep, the recovery, the energy, the exercise. And again, for women, it's all hormone informed. So we really make sure we're covering that off. And of course, grounded in physiology, my area of expertise. And it's what I use. Fundamentally, it's what I use in my coaching to work with women. And we proactively build that sustainable level of performance to avoid the burnout, going back into a state of burnout.
Okay. So we had kind of talked before on this, and how do you use technology? It sounds like you're using the Whoop device to support your clients' health and recovery. Tell me more about that.
Yes, I am. So I do have my Whoop on. I've been using mine for over 3 years now. So I have quite an incredible bank of data to work from, which is amazing. But really why I love Whoop, because it's research based, it's scientific, it's one of the most accurate and reliable on the market. But what it does, it's providing continuous monitoring of those 5 physiological areas of health that I've been talking about, which is super handy for me. And so with this data, I will say, I'll preface it by saying data for data's sake is completely useless. It's what we do with that data that we capture that makes all of the difference. So what it gives us at the start of the coaching, my clients have this on for a couple of weeks and we get a baseline of what their physiological status is at that point. So we get that insight, and then I use that information then to develop their personalized intervention, again using that 5-pillar framework. So developing that depending on their specific needs, how deep we need to go in each of these areas, and then that order. And then it's really about the implementation phase. So then we use that data, that biofeedback that we're getting, to monitor the improvements in their health and the effectiveness of those strategies and habits that we're implementing into their daily routine and their lifestyle. So I think that feedback is really the key piece. And it's not looking at everything. We look at what matters at that time. Something that I'm really excited about is a new development with Whoop and bringing out the health span feature. So this is really looking at your biological age and with a view to longevity. So for me now, it lifts our eyes up to the horizon, not just the day-to-day of what we're doing, but really bringing the future to the present. So this is your future self. What are we doing now in all of these areas which are critical for health span? What are we doing now that's building towards that health span, that future that you want. And so how long do you want to be performing in your role for without illnesses, chronic disease? All of this stuff gets brought to the fore. So that is a really exciting development for me. So not only, I guess to sum that up, not only is it really relevant now in terms of our burnout recovery journey to health and performance optimization in the now, but it really brings the focus and the lens towards how do we optimize our future self as well. So yeah, there are two ways that I'm currently using with clients.
That sounds like a great tool. That's a good plug. I'm gonna have to dig deeper and check that
Did I
out
sell it
because
for you, Scott?
yeah, you really have. And I'm just like on the market or, I'm searching and I've been, listening to other people talk and it's like, okay, I'm hearing more and more, more about this. I'm liking it.
Yeah.
Okay. What are some maybe early warning signs of burnout women should be aware of?
Yeah, so there's a lot of common signs. I'm going to break it down for ease into three key areas around physical, emotional, and behavioral signs and symptoms that you might start to experience, which actually map to the three dimensions of burnout. I won't go down that path now. But really, if we start with the physical signs and symptoms, that extreme tiredness and fatigue that doesn't go away, yet you're sleeping poorly and or disrupted, chronically stressed. Usually you're really anxious, you're on edge, stressed out. Recovery is really difficult. So often I'll hear people say, you had a weekend off or a week off on vacation or a well-being retreat or something, but it's not recovering your energy because it's so persistent. You're really just, you've got flat batteries constantly. Also the brain fog and the mental fatigue. So you really start to have trouble with your cognition, which is really challenging when you're in these leadership roles. And for women, you might start to see, as a result of that chronic stress, you might start to see irregular menstrual cycles or increase in frequency or severity of symptoms as well. So that's often a telltale sign that the stress is rising. From an emotional point, it's where we really get irritable, snappy, angry. We can get moody and fly off the handle, very unregulated, quite negative, cynical, and often our mental well-being also suffers here as well. So around that mood. So that one can be, quite emotional. Then there's the behaviors. So we start to see, or you'll feel yourself start to disconnect and detach from the world around you, sort of like this shutdown mode sort of comes in. I really think that's around that protectionism. I guess you're in survival mode, so you don't have the resources. You just start to really shut down. And that's really what I experienced. So you stop sort of engaging with the world around you. In a work sense, so in that sphere, it's about the demands and resources. So the demands that are being placed on you really feel like they're greater than the resources that you personally have to handle them. So you start to feel overwhelmed, overloaded, you're running at full tilt, but you just still can't keep up. And it starts to impact how we feel about ourselves. We feel like we're failing, we're not accomplishing, we're not achieving the goals. So that one can be quite personally impactful. And all of that combined, the physical of how our body is really just feeling, we're really emotional, the behaviors coming in of shutdown, feeling overloaded at work, it drives us towards coping mechanisms. So this is something that I certainly experienced and see a lot in clients as well, leaning towards things like excessive caffeine, alcohol consumption, sugar consumption. We start to overeat or over exercise. So I actually fell into that category as well as all of the others. In that state, exercise was sort of a stress reliever, but in that state of chronic stress and basically in burnout, I was trying to train for a marathon as well at the time. So it was just completely overloading my body. So all of those factors can really come into play, and it's really individual. So you might have some of those signs and symptoms, or you might have all of them, but how it manifests is so different for individuals. Also depending on, what are the contributors, what's the environment that you're in that are triggering the burnout. So a lot of factors at play.
Wow. No, and I'm glad you brought in the caffeine piece to it, just because I kept thinking like, no, it's not a second or a third or a fourth cup of coffee that you need. It sounds like you might just be pushing yourself too much and you need to work back on that
I
foundational
think it's when
aspect.
it comes to that over reliance, we're relying on caffeine for the energy, for the cognitive
Yeah.
boost to
The
get
sugar.
through the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sugar. Everything is a desperate attempt for the energy that we don't have, because stress in itself, physiologically, is really exhausting. It takes all of your resources away from your body's normal functioning. So you'll start to see things, your body's not operating properly. Um, and your sleep is really quite disrupted by this point, very erratic. So you're not getting that rest on a daily basis that you need. So it really is a vicious cycle. And then we have more caffeine and alcohol, which actually
I'll
disrupts
fix
our
it.
sleep and our recovery even further. And that is absolutely where I got to. And it was a terrible, terrible state. I was at a point of insomnia, barely sleeping at all. So I really sympathize with people who might feel themselves in that space.
Can you share a success story where your coaching made a significant impact?
Yes, absolutely love coaching. It's so transformative for the women that I work with, really stopping to focus on themselves and put their health back in priority. And I guess one recent case study, I was working with an executive GM of a global company, and she came to me in a really severe state of burnout. And we worked together for 12 months, so quite intensive program. We meet fortnightly, so we have really regular touch points and also, touch points outside of that. And using the 5 pillar framework that I outlined earlier, first and foremost, we got her out of that state of burnout and really to a state of thriving in her life. And a quote she shared with me at the end in our last session was, "The me that is here today would have felt impossible for me last year." So she couldn't even dream of how good she was feeling in that moment 12 months later, which was just so beautiful to see. But tactically, what we did, we reduced her stress by 88% and increased her heart rate variability, her HRV, by 34%. We improved her sleep. She got 28 minutes more sleep on average per night. We also improved the quality of her sleep. So 11% improvement in the REM sleep, which is really important piece for recovery, and increased her energy by 63%. So really, really low when we came in, as you could imagine. And then, really in this state of thriving by the end. And I think the key that the key piece for me was the exercise, and it was for her as well. And going from sort of a really overloaded corporate role, quite inactive at that point. So starting with walks to the end of the program where she was back in the gym lifting PBs. And, it was just so awesome to see that transformation, that she was capable of doing that. And yeah, so I guess that's one example. Some of those stats are really quite high. I recognize that. This was a really interesting case, and she was so dedicated and committed. She made huge advancements, as you can see. I think typically on the whole, most of my clients we're talking double-digit improvements across these areas, which, data driven, and then really strategic with the science that we implement in the habits. So yeah, it's as I said, this is why I love
Kudos.
this work
Yeah.
so much. It's so impactful.
Yeah, it's very rewarding. What advice would you give women stepping into senior leadership roles to build health, resilience, and prevent burnout?
I would ask them to empower themselves first and go in with a plan. So really know what you're committing to and have yourself, at the priority number one. It sounds selfish, but coming back to that, health is the foundation of performance. I think it's really critical. So the first piece of advice would be that really prioritize yourself and your health and use that as your decision making framework, and then thinking about what's required to make that happen so that you can perform and lead. And I think that brings me into the second point, which would be referring to those 5 pillars of health. Create your own health plan. I call it the wellbeing operating system with my clients. So establish across those each of the 5 areas, establish the key habits in each that really support your health and enable you to perform. And then I guess if you were to take that a level deeper, would be knowing which one or two of those pillars are the foundational areas or the habits that are just non-negotiable for you. So often what I see with my clients, they have 1 or 2 areas of health. It might be sleep or it might be stress. They're usually 2 of the most common ones. They have some habits in there that they are just really non-negotiable on, no matter what's going on. If they're traveling or if it's a really peak time, they'll really focus on their sleep and those sleep habits, and that's what gets them through. So it's actually sometimes about, knowing what that non-negotiable thing is, committing to that no matter what, rather than adding everything on. So a little bit, maybe not what we think. We try and do more to support ourselves, but it's not the time. And then the third would be really to stop overworking and under recovering. And I think many people can relate to this, particularly now. I certainly did. And so what I do with my clients now to head that off is a performance planning process. So really get visibility over the year, know when the hot spots are, I call them hot spots, where it's really busy and where the downtime periods are, and be really clear about that. Keep the downtime, enable yourself to recover. Do all of the other 4 pillars of health to really recharge and refresh yourself. It's so often when I do this process that we almost feel guilty for having that downtime, and I see clients start to fill it up again. So yeah, really knowing when you have to perform in those times and when you can take the downtime. So it's like periodizing training for an athlete. When are we in heavy training? When are we in recovery times? And that enables us to perform when we need to. So it's the same principle.
Great, great. This has been very insightful. I appreciate your time with this. How could people follow you?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, really enjoyed sharing more on this topic with you today. If people would like to learn more or connect with me, I would love that. I am on LinkedIn and Instagram mostly. So LinkedIn, Dr. Kellie Rose. So Kellie, Kellie, and also the same on Instagram at Dr. Kellie Rose. They're my 2 social media platforms. And of course, my website, which is drkellierose.com.
Excellent. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Wellness Growth Show. If today's conversation sparked something for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the stories, strategies, and insights from the front lines of wellness innovation. If you're a founder, operator, or health leader exploring growth into institutional markets and have a story worth telling, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out directly on LinkedIn or YouTube. And if you found this valuable, share it with a peer or post it online. You never know who needs to hear it. Until next time, stay well, keep moving, and keep building what matters.